Hey, welcome to our panel, Navigating Science with a Disability, Academic and Employment Accommodations. This event is a part of the Fall Makers series, hosted by Illimitable, an organization that highlights and advances the global contributions of disabled innovators in science, tech, design, and entrepreneurship. We would like to thank our partner, the Disability Empowerment and Higher Education Campaign, for collaborating with us on this panel event. My name is Dr. Adam Hubrig, and I'm an assistant professor of English at Sam Houston State University, where I study disability activism and rhetoric. I'm going to be the moderator for today's event, and today I'm joined by Meena Doss, Jesse Shanahan, and Hoby Wedler, as well as CART services and our ASL interpreters, and thank you very much for your labor. And now I would like to turn it over to our panelists to tell us more about their work. First, responding to the question, how did you become interested in science or research? Meena, could you start us?
Sure, yeah, I can go first. So when I was in my sophomore year of my college, I got a scholarship to attend an assistive technology conference. So when I went into the conference, I just saw so many tools there of like how technology was helping disabled people. So, for example, I saw one tool which was trying to help blind people to learn math via audio. So when I came back from the conference, I was just so supercharged, and then I just thought that how can I use my skills in the tech field to make the world better for disabled people. So one of my friends who is a blind coder, she told me that the coding tools, they are not the best accessible to blind students. So me and my advisor talked and we started a research project to make the coding tools more accessible to students who are blind. Or low vision. So that's how my journey started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meena. Jesse, could you tell us how you became interested in science or research?
Sure. So I was interested in science as a child, and then when I first went to college, I was really intimidated by the size of the classes because I came from a very, very small high school. And so I instead switched to studying language because the department size was a lot smaller at the university where I was, but ended up coming back to it because I don't think I can really stay away. And so I started to pursue a graduate degree in astrophysics. And it was difficult because I would say that higher education in my experience was not very accessible. And so for a lot of those reasons, I ended up leaving and switching to industry, where I now do data science and machine learning engineering. There's still lots of obstacles, and I would say that there are still large portions of industry that are inaccessible, but I found at least that it was a lot more accommodating than academia. And so I've been able to, while I can't continue my astronomy research necessarily, I'm still able to contribute to science. And I'm hoping that through some of my outreach work and work in disability advocacy, hopefully for future students, higher education will be more accessible.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Hoby, can you tell us about your interest in science?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And just want to start out by saying what an honor it is to be here joined by all of you today. Thanks very much for the invitation. I, like others, have a really deep interest in science and always have since I was a child. Working on projects around our house. My parents did everything really themselves on our house. That we didn't hire things out very much, so which was great because it allowed us to learn. And my parents did that because they wanted my brother and I to learn and figure out how systems work. So dealing with plumbing and electrical as a young kid, I was always fascinated with, electrons come into the house somewhere and they have to leave somewhere and they've got this force behind them. Where's that force generated? And how is water coming from the city water source to us under pressure? It must be this network of pipes and connectors, and it's really those fundamental concepts that got me really excited about science in general. And I'm sure this resonates with others on this panel, but it was a great high school chemistry instructor who really inspired me to go to the next level. I ended up pursuing an undergraduate degree in chemistry from the University of California, Davis, and I went on to get my PhD in 2016. I did leave science due to, I really have the heart of a teacher, and that was my whole drive for wanting to get involved in academia, is to teach. I wanted to be that professor who made chemistry exciting at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning to a large 500-person lecture hall full of freshman chemistry students. I am totally blind. I've been since birth, and there are some accessibility barriers that came up there. I still am a scientist for sure, but I'm now have a much more entrepreneurial career where I've got a few companies in the food and drink space and also in design and branding space. So having a good time there.
Thank you so much, Hoby. For our next question, and I know our panelists have already touched on this a little bit, but can you tell us more about the role that your disability and other identities have played in shaping your experiences as a researcher and scientist? Meena, would you mind starting us again?
Sure, yeah, I can go first. So I think for me, the way it has helped me to shape my experiences, I think it has made me much more innovative, or because of my speech disability. I've sort of learned ways to to navigate accommodations and my life in general, so I don't give up that fast. So I think it has made me more innovative and more creative. So, for example, for a school project, we were trying to make an application for people to track their finances. So everyone, they just thought of a way to like use a speech to text software to translate your speech to like to your finances, but then I came up at the thought, what about the people who have speech impediments? They are not going to be able to speak that fast. So, so what we did was we trained the application to be more patient, so that they could wait of on a person with a speech impediment or to finish what they're saying. So I think it has made me very creative. Thank you.
Thank you, Meena. I really appreciate how your identity has sparked new innovation and new research. Jesse, could you also share how your identities have played a role in shaping your experiences as a researcher and scientist?
Sure. So I completely agree with Meena, and while my experience has been different, I think it definitely resonates with me that need to be more innovative and to be more creative. I think for me, I had a little bit of a different experience because my disability was something that while I was born with it, I wasn't aware of it until I was in my early 20s. And it started to manifest in very unusual and mysterious ways that doctors couldn't figure out. And so for me, as I was simultaneously going through the process of getting my diagnosis, I was also beginning my first experiences with research. And it was interesting because while I would say my experiences with doctors and kind of with the medical field, at least in the United States, weren't the most positive. A lot of my experiences there were very, they were dismissed, and it was difficult to kind of push through and find answers. I found this parallel between how I was approaching my research and then how I was trying to find answers about my experience with my disability. And so as I moved through this, I would say it made me a better researcher because I was able to continue looking, thinking outside of the box, looking for other answers. Overall, I would say that it's meant, for me at least, that especially now when I'm working as a data scientist, that there are many things I would say that a lot of able-bodied or neurotypical people don't consider when, like in Meena's experience, building applications or offering services. There's a lot of exclusion that happens, sometimes not even intentionally, but through ignorance. And so while I definitely, as a teenager, was very ignorant myself, as I've gone through this experience and tried to not only make things more accessible for myself, but learn about other needs, it's been something that I can bring to my work, and it's made me, a better programmer. It's made me a better, software designer, because I really do believe that when we make things with disabled people in mind, specifically to be inclusive, it creates things that are more accessible overall. And so I would say that it's made a lot of my work better, even if it was definitely challenging at first.
Jesse, thank you so much for sharing about your experiences leading to greater accessibility. Hoby, if you don't mind also answering the same question about the role disability and other identities have played and shaping your own experiences as a researcher and scientist.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with the other panelists. You know, especially what Jesse said about, you know, when you figure out how to design one thing to make it accessible for one group of people, you know, you really are typically making that resource or that service much more available and accessible to the world at large. So I think that's a really good practice. Whenever we do something just for one group of people, we're actually, you know, thinking about how we can help so many more people along the way. Um, you know, I studied organic chemistry. It was my passion as an undergraduate, and therefore what ended up being my graduate work. I ended up studying computational organic chemistry. So basically, using the computer to probe various organic molecules and figure out why electrons would go and one place instead of another to turn one molecule into a different molecule. And organic chemistry is one of the most visual sciences out there. And people ask me all the time, you know, what made you gravitate towards organic chemistry? And I had a hard time answering that question until I was at the end of my second organic chemistry course in undergrad. And I realized, wow, the reason this material is coming so naturally to me is because I've been using what feels like the same part of my brain to do organic chemistry and literally think my way through atomic connections and molecules that I've used for my survival as a blind traveler ever since I learned to walk. So I can't see desks in a classroom. I have to visualize that. I can't see traffic on the street. I have to listen and visualize. And when I'm planning a route from where I'm sitting in my home office, for instance, down to the local supermarket, I think it through in my mind. And that process of thinking it through is not that different than thinking about how atoms connect to form molecules. So I like to say that, you know, we can take distances in feet and miles and convert them, or meters and kilometers in the metric system, and convert them to angstroms and nanometers. And the thought process really is the same. So I feel like I had an advantage that I didn't even realize I had for a while as a truly blind researcher in an organic chemistry group, because I viewed things differently. And I wasn't, you know, subject to understanding what things looked like on the page and how atoms were drawn out and connected by bonds in 2 dimensions. My brain could really think about that in 3 dimensions. And I think that's how my sort of unique ability as a blind guy in the organic chemistry lab was able to help my research and provide more value there because of it.
Thank you so much, Hoby. And I think it dovetails nicely with our next question as you're considering your educational experiences. The next question I'd like our panelists to consider are, what challenges have you or others faced when requesting accommodations in employment or educational settings? Meena, could I have you begin our conversation again?
Sure, yeah. I think for me, it's like 2 things. And the first thing is that it's like me who always has to take the first step to like ask for accommodations. I don't think I have found any company yet who asked me themselves that, do you need any accommodations? So I think when I first started college, I didn't know so much about accommodations, what they meant and stuff. So it just scared me always to like to ask for them. It just made me feel that the people, they may think that I'm not smart enough, so yet I think it was that for me, and the reason I think those feelings stemmed, they were because of the attitudinal barriers that we still face. People still think that just because I can't speak fluently, I'm not smart enough, or I lack intelligence. So I think it was mostly myself internalized thoughts that if I do ask for accommodation, they may think I'm not the best suited for the job, and I still remember in my first year of my of college, I went for a job interview, and I didn't ask for accommodations, and the interviewers actually thought that I could not speak English, because I was trying to hide my stutter. So I think disability disclosure and asking for accommodations is a very personal choice, but in my case, it has certainly helped me to disclose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meena. I'm glad that disclosing has been helpful, but I'm also so sorry it's been so difficult in the assumptions people have made. Jesse, if I could also have you consider the challenges you faced when requesting accommodations, or in either employment or education.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, while my disability is genetic and I was born with it, it didn't really kind of start to impact my life greatly until after the majority of my undergraduate experience. So I had no experience with accommodations, and I entered graduate school. At the time, I would say, my disability kind of goes in between being invisible and visible. So at the time I was walking with a cane, but when I was first considering accommodations, like Meena, I didn't even really know what they were or what to ask for or what was possible. I mean, I knew kind of conceptually what accommodations were, but I didn't know what was possible for me, like what would help me, because this whole experience was very new to me. And while I was lucky that the Office of Disability Accommodations at my graduate school was extremely helpful and supportive, I got very spoiled, I would say, interacting with them. It was actually the professors that had more of a negative impact. So while the office itself was very supportive and was very understanding when I kind of walked in and said, I know I need that, I just don't know what I need. The professors, like with Meena, you know, there was a lot of judgment about, well, if you need accommodations, you must not be smart enough, or you must not be a hard enough, you know, worker or something, because sometimes I would need flexible deadlines, or I wouldn't be able to attend class. And I found that despite working actually probably harder, because I had to make up for a lot of the kind of the perceptions, I would say that there was still this kind of feeling that I didn't fit in. I remember a professor saying to me at one point, I think you're too sick to be a scientist. And I just was like, well, and especially now, honestly, to just kind of be completely candid, it's been a little frustrating with the pandemic, seeing just how easy, understandably, but like, you know, there are challenges, but just how quickly a lot of colleges have gone to completely virtual, or, you know, workplaces offering complete telework and whatnot. When seeking those accommodations myself, I was told that, well, that means I'm not working as hard. I'm glad that hopefully companies and universities are learning through this, that you can do it, and it means people are working just as hard. But it was frustrating for me as a graduate student, for sure. Now, I will say that when I left graduate school and I transitioned into industry, at that point, I was a little bit cynical. I was very much expecting to face a lot of the same discrimination and obstacles that I had dealt with in academia, but I've been really pleasantly surprised, at least with the one company that I've been working for since, where the very first day, it wasn't necessarily phrased as accommodations, because I didn't disclose at that time, but they just asked, what do you need to do your best work? And I was a little bit taken aback, because I was used to, like in Meena's experience, the burden being on you to disclose and to seek out the accommodations. So when I even tested the waters of, well, flexible hours, you know, being able to kind of take a half day here and work extra this day, or, you know, is that okay? Or if I telework? And they were very understanding, and none of that required me disclosing. It was just seen as, oh, you need these things to do your best work. Well, we want you to, you know, be set up for success. And I think that was a good experience for me. Now, I think there are plenty of companies that don't approach it that way, unfortunately. And it is still, there's kind of a culture that I found, both unfortunately in academia and in the industries that I'm part of, around kind of this physical wellness, where like everybody's bonding over going running, or at conferences there are, you know, there are social events going to be a hike, or things that are very exclusionary if you think about it. And for me, with my condition, I can't always participate in those things. And so there is kind of still, I would say, that underlying cultural feeling of, well, I can participate in my work, but I still don't fit with everyone else, because that's not really something I can participate in. So I think in the future, I would like to see, especially as places become more accessible, I would like to see companies and universities taking a look at those kinds of cultures and how they exclude people, because it's not just as simple as like, here's a ramp, you know, you've got your accommodation, or like, you know, here's your ergonomic chair or something. It's the things that really have impacted me over the years have been that feeling of just never being accepted, never being able to really participate, because you're always on the outside. So in graduate school, I did actually require an ergonomic chair, and they gave me one, but they gave me this like very large, obvious desk with a special sign saying like reserved and all this. So no matter what class I was in, I always stood out immediately as like being othered, kind of. And so I think that, you know, even if you disclose or even if you don't disclose, I think it's important to try to our points that we made earlier, make things accessible from the start, kind of. So just like designing a piece of software, if you make it as accessible as possible, you hopefully remove some of that burden of people to request accommodations because you've built in the accessibility already. And while that won't be 100% possible for every need, I would say the more that we're able to do that, the less we other disabled people by requiring them to disclose and seek accommodations that set them apart. So, but that was my experience.
Jesse, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I think the line of inquiry about how do we create a culture of access is so thought-provoking and interesting. And Hoby, that brings us to you with this question. If you could tell us more about some of the challenges you faced when requesting accommodations in education or employment.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, it's a great question. And you know what I might say is that my disability is very obvious. You know, I'm a blind guy. I carry a white cane. I've carried a white cane since I was 3 years old. People pretty much know, okay, he's not going to be able to see the whiteboard. He's not going to be able to see what we're presenting. A lot of people should know that and don't, but that's, you know, it's been interesting because my disability is a little bit more obvious. My tactic has always been, and it's actually paid off really well, to educate. So starting in high school even, and my mother was a teacher of the visually impaired for 27 years, actually took on that career after I was born. So I think she was able to help me advocate in this way quite a bit. And my father was the same way, very much supported me taking responsibility for myself and for allowing instructors to know what worked and what didn't. So I would go around and actually explain to my professors what they, you know, what would help me the most. And because I did that, and I would usually meet with them before the class even started. So before, you know, like at the end of the quarter before, or very much at the beginning of the quarter where the class occurred. And I'd say, you know, I am blind. I'll sit near the front probably. And if there's something that I don't understand that you're writing on the board, I'll ask about it. So that was really being able to teach professors and educate them because they don't know what they don't know. And I'm sorry to hear about, for instance, Jesse's experience where professors would say, yeah, you're too sick to come to class. I mean, that's really unfortunate. And I see where that can come from and where that can stem from. For me, I'm sure I was always, you know, I would bug them sometimes because I would sit up front and say, hey, I didn't, when you said this here and tapped on the chalkboard, I don't know what you're referring to. I also have had an amazing opportunity to work with a wonderful assistant all the way through undergraduate and graduate school. And the interesting way that I met this wonderful person was through our Office of Disability Resources. And that was actually the group that I had a little bit more trouble with. They did not understand how a blind person could study science. And a couple of people in that office one person in particular made some remarks that were particularly jarring to me, basically really discouraging me from studying the sciences. So I actually drifted away from them and sort of did more on my own and worked more directly with my assistant who actually learned Braille to bring stuff to light. And you know, those were some challenges for sure. I've had one and maybe two challenging chemistry professors who in my undergraduate career who really put dampers on what I could do and were very, very hard to deal with, hard to work with. Just because they didn't want the burden of me being there, me asking them extra questions and that sort of thing. But the rest of the couple of dozen professors I had across all subjects were super accommodating. And again, it was more me telling them not to worry about what the Office of Disability Resources was telling them and more just to work with me and this person who I had as an amazing assistant. So those are definitely challenges in the education sector. But I feel like overall with an attitude of, hey, let me just teach you what works best for me, that tends to work really well for all of us. In terms of employment, I did apply before starting to work for myself. I did apply for a couple of companies and heard from them when I didn't get the job that I'm a great candidate, but you know, because they are not sure what accommodations they'll need to provide, it just is hard to know what I will need. And you know, not all of them said this to me, but I read between the lines that, you know, I was the right candidate for the job, but not knowing what I would need and what equipment I would need kind of made it hard for them to give me the job. And that was very discouraging. And I said, okay, I'm going to do this myself. So I started my first company in 2017 and took it from there. And then I still have the challenge of convincing my clients that I, in fact, can, fend for myself, and I will provide, when you're selling a service, you have to be able to justify that you're solving a problem. And sometimes as a blind person, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, well, it can definitely be a challenge. But it's just all about, showing people rather than, you can tell to a certain extent, but you really have to show, in the grand scheme of things. And it's about showing people we can contribute and we can do our best despite our disabilities. And those are challenges, but they're also really exciting when we can overcome them.
Thank you so much, Hoby. I really see a common thread in your responses. Each panelist talking about the assumptions made by abled instructors and how they project these things onto us, and how employers sometimes also have these same assumptions. That brings us to our next question. Can you tell us a little more about how you determined for yourself whether or not you should go about requesting accommodations, what maybe encouraged you to ask for accommodations, or what maybe prevented you from seeking them? Meena, if you could start us once again.
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, the changing point was when I started to realize that I'm not able to give my 100% at my work. So an example, if I go to a job interview, I was so focused and trying to hide my stutter that I was not trying to focus on the actual interview. So so that's when I decided that this has to stop. So I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. So so the most of the accommodations that I get in my school settings, just if the courses they require speaking, or so. For example, in last semester in the class of mine, we to do a presentation for a game design class. So what I did was I spoke to the professor and just asked her if I could use a text-to-speech software to record the presentation, and she agreed to it, and it went well. In terms of job interviews, I think two things have worked very well for me. The first thing is to ask for extended time or so that I have the time to complete what I want to say. And the second thing which has worked great for me is to use a mixture of like chatting and talking. So it's a very common thing for me to type and then speak at the same time. So if I get too tired speaking, I'll just stop for some time and then type out what I want to say and then go back to speaking. So I think those two are the accommodations which have worked for me till now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Meena. Jesse, considering the same question, how did you decide when and how to ask for accommodations?
So actually, the first time that I asked for accommodations, I didn't really have a choice. So the observatory where the graduate student offices were located was a historic building and therefore incredibly inaccessible. So actually, to get into any of the three, if I remember right, three entrances, they all had stairs. And then there were 2 flights of stairs down to get to where the graduate student offices were. And then to access the roof, which had some telescopes on it, was a very steep and rickety spiral staircase. And so stairs in particular can be, there are days where stairs are okay, and there are days where stairs are just, they're not going to happen. And my disability is progressive. And so at the time I was also concerned about any kind of long-term needs. And so if it became that I wouldn't be able to do stairs at all, I didn't know how I was ever going to be able to get in the building. So I actually ended up seeking out accommodations first because I literally couldn't get in the door. So, but I think it was a very educational experience for me because I was diagnosed with my disability a month before starting graduate school. And so I was learning about what to expect at the exact same time that I was trying to figure out what I would need over the years. And so that was very challenging. And so I ended up requesting accommodations of several different kinds, mostly honestly, thanks to the Office of Disability Services, and because they sat down with me and explained different kinds of accommodations and what generally people have asked for in the past. Because I went and I said, what can I even ask for? And thinking back now, it would have been wonderful to have this knowledge beforehand, because I think I would have been able to ask for things that I needed before it came to the point that I, had no choice. I will say that given the experiences that I had in graduate school with conferences and professors and academia in general, it made me very hesitant to talk about accommodations or request anything when I started applying for jobs. And so I didn't disclose, I didn't request accommodations. I was lucky that, like I mentioned, the company where I work now, the policy was, at least in my team, to kind of say, is there anything you need? How can we, help you do your work? But even then, I would say that there was still this pressure, and some of it, from my negative experiences in academia, where I would push myself to do things, even if maybe I felt like it was going to be kind of damaging to my health. And so the pandemic in some ways has been helpful, as bad as that sounds, just the fact that everybody's on telework, because I've been able to pace myself. I've been able to be comfortable and do things in the way that I need. It can be difficult, I would say, when there are those perceptions of what kind of success or what a good employee kind of looks like. And a lot of that actually is rather ableist when you start to think about it. It's, you are dressed in a certain way, and especially being kind of femme presenting, a lot of the expectations around women's clothing in professional workplaces, things like heels or, uncomfortable business wear, that, you're sitting present in a meeting and you position your body in ways that are normal, like this is from obviously their perception, and you act in ways that people think are within this, ambiguous definition of normal. And all of that is just so ableist when you think about it. And so I think it will be interesting to see how things change once everyone goes back to work. That being able to kind of hide my disability sometimes and kind of fake the able-bodiedness is something that I've kind of fallen back on, but it has had consequences, because it means that, I'll do a work day, a normal day at the office, go in, and this involves a lot of walking, this involves a lot of public transportation, and carrying a bag with a laptop and all kinds of gear. And so it means at the end of the day, when my coworkers might be able to go home and relax and recharge or have hobbies, I'm completely exhausted. And so all I can really do is just lay down and try to rest my body. So I think that it's difficult, because I worry so much about those negative perceptions, because they've damaged, my success in academia, or kind of prevented me from really being successful in academia, that when considering disclosing in my current workplace, as much as possible, I guess for me, I am kind of avoiding it and hoping that just by presenting like, I do better with telework, or I do better with flexible hours and things, I can sidestep that. I realize that's not something, it is kind of a bit of a privilege to be able to like hide my disability sometimes. But I think that given some of the perceptions that I dealt with in academia, it's made me very hesitant to disclose again in the future.
Yeah, that's all very difficult, Jesse. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Hoby, I know you've already touched on this a bit as you were explaining some of the difficulty you had with the Disability Resource Office. But if you don't mind just telling us a little more about how you choose sort of when and how to seek accommodations and some of your strategies.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, it's interesting. I have, whether it's, a blessing or whatever you want to call it, I don't know. I don't have to hide my disability. It's out in the open. I wear it on my shoulder. So it really is not surprising when I go to a professor or to an employer and say, hey, I'm blind. I need these materials made into an accessible format so that I can actually read them. That isn't really a surprise. And for me, when I ask, I really like to do things on my own as much as I can. So I don't like to get a bunch of assistants. In the science laboratory, I had in the wet lab or experimental lab, I had an assistant just there to be my eyes, but they weren't doing any of the thinking for me or any of the work for me. And any of the procedural steps that I could take on independently and execute on independently, I would do. And I would take extra time to be ultra independent. I would just say though that it really wasn't ever a question of, oh, do I ask for accommodations for this? It made sense or it didn't. I mean, the articles that were published online in an accessible format, I could read no problem, but I did have to get audio textbooks or in some cases textbooks in Braille. I pushed for that in many instances in the sciences, but struggled a lot to get that to happen because a lot of these books weren't already Brailled and Braille was expensive. And I did get some pushback from the Student Disability Center on that. But when to ask for accommodations, okay, so something like double time on an exam, I would get that. I would ask for that just because yeah, on chemistry exams, it would definitely help me. On history exams, I used it because it was available, but I didn't always, need it or use all of the time. But it was nice to have, and I don't feel ashamed for asking for the time, even though, I could probably take one of those tests realistically in the same amount of time as my sighted peers or my non-disabled peers. Um, but it's just overall, my feeling is do what you can yourself. If you can't do it, whether your disability is something that can be hidden or not, it's good to just be bold and ask for that accommodation as much as possible. And that's what I've done in my workplace, and that's what I did in college as well.
Hoby, thank you so much for sharing those tips and strategies. We only have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to skip to our last question for the panel, and that is, what can allies do to amplify the work of aspiring scientists and researchers with disabilities and chronic diseases? What do we want our allies to know, and how they might be most helpful? Meena, can I turn one last time to you to start us on our conversation?
Sure. I think the most important thing allies can do is to give us a voice. I think it is very important to do that, because sometimes you don't, as a person with a disability, you don't believe in yourself, so it is nice to have someone who does. Like I just want to share a small example. I think 4 years back, I was working as a researcher for a professor, and then we were supposed to present at work at a conference. So, and the professor told me that I shouldn't. I should not speak at the conference because I take too much time. And then that just made me so sad. It's just I just felt so worthless. Then, or 2 years back, when I started my master's program, we had the same opportunity to present at the conference, but at this time, my new professor told me that I should go speak. So it just made me feel so energized and so positive, and I felt heard. So I think that allies, they should try to give a voice to us. Yeah, thank you.
Meena, thank you so much for speaking to allies. We are almost out of time. Jesse, do you have any suggestions for allies?
Sure. So I want to echo everything that Meena just said. And to add on to it, I think an additional thing, aside from, I would say, the obvious, like educating yourself and listening to disabled people when they share experiences, my other request would be for people to examine their perceptions of things like what success looks like, or what a scientist looks like, or what being a good student looks like, and think about how many of those things are actually necessary. So when, there's I was mentioning this earlier, like the perception of your successful employee coming in dressed a certain way, sitting a certain way, talking a certain way. Well, are those things actually success, or are these kind of prescriptive ideas that we have that are more about kind of those societal ableist kind of expectations? Is that really success? Is that really what a good student or a good scientist looks like? And this is something that we faced a lot in astronomy, to give an example. So one of the things that, kind of two examples, I guess, astronomy requires observing with telescopes. Well, nowadays, a lot of that's done remotely. And so these more arduous observing runs where somebody's there in person might not always be necessary. So, and yet we still sometimes hold on to this idea that, if you need to kind of telework, then you're not really working as hard. Well, I would suggest that people should examine why it is that they think that. And similarly, I worked a bit with a blind astronomer, and she faced very similar kind of ideas of, well, astronomy is an observational science. You have to see the sky. And she's like, really? No, you don't. And here's why. And showed her research and how she does excellent research, but it's just a different way of interacting with the data. And so I think for allies, you have to constantly, just like we all do with our own prejudices, we have to constantly be self-examining and looking at why it is that when we see a disabled person, either requesting accommodations, performing their research in a different way, that somehow a lot of people seem to think that different means less. And so I would encourage people to really examine those expectations and those ideas around how we judge what we think is kind of valuable, because more often than not, I think they have more roots in ableism than they do in actually valuable contributions. So.
So much, Jesse. Hoby, if I can have you speak to the same question, and we have just about 1 minute left.
No problem. Hey, is this audio okay? I hear a little bit of a feedback.
It's okay here on my end. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, your audio is coming through a little bit muffled. Jesse's wasn't, but yours is, Adam. Just FYI. My answer to this question, I know we have a very limited time, and my answer is very simple. The best allies are the ones that see the value that people with disabilities bring to whatever it is that they're doing. And they see that this new, unique perspective is actually a really important one and really valuable one, and really helps their work in many places. So at UC Davis, my advisor is working on continuing to make chemistry, and the chemistry that his group does in particular, more accessible to blind people. Even 4 years out of grad school, I'm still collaborating with him on that, and we're trying to bring more blind students in. And it's just about making an inclusive, available environment, and championing what someone with a disability can bring to the table that maybe someone without that same disability can't bring. So where can we glean that value? And I just think it's a wonderful thing when the opportunities are found and acted upon, and everybody wins. So that's the best way to form alliances, and just be accepting, be approachable. And if you're aware, I really think being aware of all of our inputs that are coming into our mind and everything one can do we're really, by virtue of awareness, becoming more inclusive. So I think just being as aware as possible of what someone can do is really important.
All right, Hoby, thank you so much. And I just want to thank our panelists one more time for their contributions and for today's discussion. Thank you so much to our ASL and CART interpreters. And finally, thank you all so much, our viewers, for joining us today for the panel Navigating Science with a Disability, Employment and Academic Accommodations. You can support the work of our panelists by using the links in the description box or by visiting illimitable.org. You can learn more about the Makers series and how you can get involved at illimitable.org. Thank you all so much.